Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts. I'm very excited to be here again with Madeline Bilis talking about hikes in the 50 best hikes in Eastern Massachusetts. That's what we're going to be talking about. And it's going to be fabulous because Madeline was with us last May and we had a wonderful conversation about a bunch of hikes that she had done. And we all wanted to go hiking like the next day. And I wonder if people actually did, because I was like gung ho. So I think we'll be all the same this week. So before we get started with Madeline, I just want to say a couple things. I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting this program and all of our programs. I'd like to thank Madeline for letting us share this program with other libraries. A bunch of them signed on, and I just think that when libraries work together, we just make magic. So I'm very excited to work with my colleagues on bringing Madeline back to Ashland. Madeline did send signed book plates to Aesop's Fable, and I will put a link in the chat about how you can order signed books from her because everybody wants to have, 50 hikes in Eastern Massachusetts. It's amazing. In fact, we have it in the library. So if you don't buy it, definitely check it out from your local library. Madeline has about a 30-minute presentation. I'm going to turn the chat off during her presentation, but I'll turn it back on when she's done. If you have questions for her, though, put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom screen, because that's much easier for me to keep track of. So Madeline Bilis is a journalist. Actually, I just found out that she has gone rogue. That's not the right word, is it?
You can say that.
That's right. She's gone out on her own to become a journalist in the whole wide world instead of being a staff journalist at the place that she was before. So I won't mention them because I don't like them anymore. But she is very well versed in writing in Massachusetts and things that we all love. So her first book, The 50 Hikes in Eastern Massachusetts, is one that she wrote. She actually has this really interesting history and story about why she wrote this book and how she wrote this book. So I'm going to leave it to her to tell you because I love that story. Welcome, Madeline. Thank you so much for being back here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and tell you about some of the hikes in my book.
That's right.
So,
So this time we're focusing on coastal hikes. Is that right?
yes, exactly. So I've picked out a few that are near the coast, whether that's on the Cape, North Shore, South Shore, and one on an island, actually. So it's going to be pretty fun.
Right. It's gonna be, I can't wait. I can't wait. Um,
Great. So I think what I'll do is share my screen then.
okay, so I'm gonna go off screen and I'll come back when we're ready for the Q&A.
Great. Alrighty. So let's see here. Okay. I think we should be good to go here.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming tonight. My name's Madeline Bilis. I'm the author of this book here, 50 Hikes in Eastern Massachusetts. It was published in August 2019, so a couple years ago now. But basically, I spent the majority of 2018 hiking and writing to create this book. But before I talk more about the hikes, I can tell you about me. I'm a contributing editor at Boston Magazine, as well as a freelance writer and editor for a variety of publications. So these days in my freelance career, I write for places like Travel and Leisure, Architectural Digest, The Wall Street Journal, Real Simple, Slate, Nantucket Magazine, Realtor.com, a couple of local interior design publications, and plenty of others, including, posts about hikes. I just wrote about hikes for Time Out Boston, if anybody reads Time Out. I graduated from Emerson College in Boston with a degree in journalism, but I'm from Dudley, Mass, so out in central Mass, south of Worcester, and I currently live in Newton, so not too far away from Ashland. So I'll tell you a little bit about the beginning stages of writing this book, because when I was approached to write it, in 2017, I was on staff at Boston Magazine. I was an associate editor there covering travel in New England, but also a little like real estate and home stuff. But I was sort of like the main person on the travel and outdoors beat for Boston Magazine. And so an editor at the Countryman Press noticed this and approached me to write the book. And I said, Yes, and that's how we got started. And almost immediately kind of sat down, made a huge spreadsheet of all, the hikes that I thought would be worth featuring in the book. Um, Basically by first, like cursory research, Googling what hikes were popular, which hikes were featured in previous books, because I should say there are two main books that Countryman Press wanted for Massachusetts. Western Mass, the Berkshires, and then Eastern Mass. So if you divide Massachusetts into two parts, Central Mass, most of Central Mass is included in the Eastern Massachusetts umbrella. So I've heard people say like, oh, why is Mount Wachusett in here? That's not Eastern Mass. But in this case, if we're dividing Massachusetts in half, it is Eastern Massachusetts. So that's the geography I used when making the big spreadsheet that I just mentioned, to figure out which hikes I wanted to do. And I also did something that feels a little more modern than some of the, I don't know, previous hiking books I've read, where I searched geotag locations on Instagram to see if any hikes were particularly photogenic, because I knew that would be important for at least some of the hikes in the book. And so that was an interesting way to see what was worth writing about. How was it captured through other people's lenses and experiences? So that was neat. So I had the spreadsheet, narrowed it down to the top 50, sort of wanted to make sure I got enough geographic diversity in Eastern Massachusetts, wanted to have, a range of difficulty levels and things like that, and ended up with this. And I'm going to tell you about Coastal Walk specifically today because I have chatted about some of my favorites from the book last May. So, but before I talk about the coastal walks, I will mention my disclaimer that I always tell people when I'm talking about my book, which is that Eastern Massachusetts, it's not a particularly rigorous place for hiking. Like there aren't many mountains. We're not going to notch a lot of elevation when we're doing hikes. If you came to our last presentation, you might remember me saying that while I was writing the book, some friends and like hikers that I met would ask me like, oh, how much elevation are you notching? And I kind of laughed because I wasn't really notching any. There are a lot of gentle walks in this book, and the amount of hikes that are quote unquote strenuous there's very few. And with these coastal walks, they'll all be pretty gentle, except for my favorite one, which I'm gonna talk about first. And you should know too, if you get the book or you already have it, at the beginning of the book, there's a list with a short description of each hike. So you can sort of look at like a snapshot view of what is included in the book. And then at the beginning of every chapter, there's a little box that tells you the difficulty level, the length, whether it's good for kids, whether you can bring a dog. And each bathroom also, I mean, not each bathroom, each chapter tells you if the hike has a bathroom, because that was important to me and something I thought a lot of other books didn't do. So anyway, that's the gist of the book. The book is categorized into a couple of different sections. So there's west of Boston, south of Boston, north of Boston, and then a special section with Cape Cod and the Harbor Islands. And we're going to be talking about a lot of those hikes today. But yeah, like Mina said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section and hopefully I can answer them later. But here we go. I'm going to chat about some of my favorite coastal walks in the book. The first one is my favorite one, which is the Great Island Trail in Wellfleet. So the Great Island Trail is part of the Cape Cod National Seashore. And all the Cape hikes, I should say, are lovely, but this one is really special. It says 6.8 miles here and in the book, but it can be extended to an 8-mile journey if you'd like to. And basically you're weaving through sand dunes along the National Seashore, and seeing some really beautiful vistas when you get out there. And so when you get to Wellfleet and you start the trail, you sort of gently stroll along where the Herring River lets out into Wellfleet Harbor. And you stroll there for a little bit and sort of take in the views until you climb Not a particularly high hill, but a hill up into a grove of pitch pine trees, which are some of my favorite trees. And while you're on this hill where there are trees, you can sort of look out to Cape Cod Bay and see some really beautiful views from that feel like you're up high, of the bay and of these large stretches of sand with nobody on them, which I think is a really rare sight on the Cape, right? Usually they're dotted with umbrellas and towels and kids, which is fun. But in this case, it's just like unspoiled beauty, and it's really wonderful. And so then you leave this grove of pitch pines, you go back down into the dunes, and you're weaving in and out until you get to the other side where you're at the bay again, and you can walk along the water, sort of like in this picture here. If you see the beachy stretch on the left, you sort of trace the water until you get back to where you began. And when I do this hike, I like to take a little mid-hike swim, especially because with this hike, there's not a lot of tree cover, only that one portion on the hill that I mentioned. So you're going to want to bring a lot of sunscreen if you do this one. But also, it gets pretty hot, so you can take a mid-hike dip. And when I took my dip, when I was researching this hike for the book, it was really hot. I sort of jumped in the water, wasn't looking at the water too closely. And when I came up, I noticed something maybe like 8 feet in front of me, and it spooked me. And I realized I was looking into the eyes of a seal. And I stayed very still because I didn't want to disturb it. Wasn't sure if it would be startled or, I don't know, come near me. And so I sort of just like, backed away slowly, didn't say anything, and ended up sitting on a rock where I felt was far enough away where I could still look at the seal, let it do its thing without being too close. And so we kind of looked at each other for a while, and then he left. And that was a very neat experience to have. And the other thing about it is there was no one else on the beach. So it's like, not only are there not crowds of people at the beach, but you can sort of safely see wildlife from afar. Wouldn't recommend getting close to any wildlife on any of the hikes, especially the National Seashore, but that was a really fun one. So while I did start with my favorite, I love all of the coastal walks that I'm going to highlight. Oops, I'm backwards. The second one here is Peddix Island, and this is the island hike that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So Peddix Island is an island in Boston Harbor. This is also part of a national park. It's part of the Boston Harbor Islands National Park, and basically there's a cluster. I'm blanking on how many islands are in Boston Harbor, but this is part of the grouping of islands that you can visit via ferry. And Peddix is special because you need to take two ferries to get there, a regular ferry and then an inter-island ferry. And I think that makes this hike and also the island itself a bit of a hidden gem, because some tourists or even some Bostonians don't necessarily want to take that extra leg of the journey to go to an island when they could just go to the first island that the ferry stops at. So this one is really lovely. The hike that you do when you get here just sort of circles the perimeter of the island, which is a bit of a funky shape. It has like three main sections. One of them is home to Fort Andrews. Several of the islands in the harbor have forts back in the day for fortification. So this one was built in 1900, named after a Civil War general. It served many different uses throughout its lifetime, but its last use, I think, is the most interesting, is that it housed Italian prisoners of war during World War II. So these men were moved there after the surrender of Italy in 1943 and sort of lived and were forced to work there. They weren't viewed as a threat, which is interesting. So they could go about the island as they pleased, and they also set up visits to the city for them. So many of these prisoner of war would visit the North End, where there was also a large population of Italian people. And it turns out about 50 of these men married young women in the North End. So yeah, there were some POW marriages, which is interesting. And so when you get to the island, that's sort of the first thing you see is the fort, and there's some buildings associated with it. And you keep going, and you sort of walk along the gut, and you begin to see these colorful little cottages. They're pretty small, they're painted in bright colors, they're like covered in buoys, they're really cute. And you might even see, clotheslines, people hanging out next to them. And basically, these cottages were built by Portuguese fishermen in the early 1900s, when there was, a huge Portuguese fisherman population in the harbor and surrounding areas. Much, much later, when the islands became public property in the 1970s, the state took over the island and the buildings and basically decided that the folks who lived in these cottages seasonally could pay the state a fee for using the land under it. And when this sale happened, there was a wonky sort of rule put in place where, if any of these cottage owners, if they were to move away or, eventually when they pass away, the ownership of the cottages reverts back to the state. So the people who have the cottages now can't sell them. They can, turn them over, and they can't give them to their kids either, because once they pass away, they go to the state. So that is an interesting little loophole. And for now, there are people living in them. We'll see. I don't know how long that lasts for, but that's always been an interesting tidbit to me. So there's a lot of history here. There's even more that you can read about in the book. There used to be a hotel on the island too that was like a pretty raucous hotel during the Prohibition era. So there's a lot to learn, and aside from the history, there are the beautiful views. So you can sort of see it here, but there's a really nice view of the skyline from one of the edges of the island. And so yeah, you trace sort of the coast of the island and learn about the history, and it's a really lovely walk that can take 2 hours or more, depending on how long you want to linger. So that is a really fun one. The next one that I want to highlight is Nascatucket Bay State Reservation. I would say a smaller, lesser known reservation down on the south coast. So it's small, but it's really lovely. And basically when you get here, it starts out as a gentle walk that sort of leads from a woodsy area out to the beach. And the beach is actually the photo that we're looking at here. So it's not a sandy beach. It's not really where you would go and post up an umbrella and sunbathe, but it's a beach nonetheless, and you can swim here. So when you're standing on these rocks, you'll probably find oyster, clam, and whelk shells in the rocks. And that's a signal. The shells are a signal of the healthy eelgrass population in the water. So it's a good environment for these shellfish. And then if you stoop down and look closer at the rocks, you'll see that there are sea snails sort of like latching on to the stones there. I definitely looked at a lot of snails when I was here. But yeah, wear sturdy shoes so you can keep your balance when you're walking on these rocks, and you sort of round the corner here and head back to where you came from. So it's only 2.5 miles. It's pretty quick. You can get through it quickly. But again, this is another place where you can sort of linger and dilly-dally if you want and look at some of the wildlife there. A fun one if you're down on the South Coast. The next one that I'm very excited to talk about is the Nauset Marsh Trail. This is the one that's on the cover of the book right here, but I figured I would feature a different photo from it. So the Nauset Marsh Trail is also part of the Cape Cod National Seashore. And this is a very easy, very gentle walk that goes around kettle ponds and a salt marsh over here in Eastham. So kind of like Nascatucket, there's a lot of wildlife to see. There's mussels, oysters, quahogs, other shellfish, and lots of birds. And actually, when I visited on this particular hike, I was there with my mom, and we saw a heron in the water, which was really neat. So it was just sort of hanging out. But yeah, I think my overall thing that I think you should know about this hike is that it's fairly easy. And as you can see with this bridge, like it's flat, it's not, your shoe's not going to get caught in roots or anything like that. You can do it in about 45 minutes. So it's quick, easy, and gentle. And I highly recommend it. And then the next one here is another favorite. I think I saw some folks who mentioned they were from the North Shore in the chat, but this is Halibut Point State Park in Rockport. A favorite of mine as well. And you'll see the distance and the hiking time are the same here because I definitely dilly-dallied a lot. And I recommend, readers do too. So that's why there's a little discrepancy. But the thing about this park is it has these huge granite cliffs, which you see in the picture. And they were once home to a quarry for the Rockport Granite Company, right? And so what you're looking at is the quarry, and you can kind of see it, but right here is the ocean beyond it. If my cursor is showing it, I'm circling it, but the ocean's beyond the quarry. And basically in the 1980s, long after it was a quarry, it was turned into a park. And so the hike, you basically start out by sort of circling part of the quarry, and then you walk out to where, the coast is, the ocean. And when you're there, you can see out pretty far, and then you sort of scale a grout pile, which is like just a big old pile of granite and grout. And once you get to the top, you have even better views from up there. And, on a clear day, you can see the Isle of Shoals in New Hampshire. You can see out to Maine. You can see sort of Crane Beach and Ipswich. There's a lot you can see from this vantage point. And then once you're done, drink it in the views over there, you turn around and come back and circle the other side of the quarry. Yeah, and this is a really sort of unique hike, I would say. And I think there's maybe 2 in the book that feature quarries, and this is one of them, and definitely the most picturesque. And I also prepared a couple of other coastal walks that I really enjoyed. The first one is World's End. I think this one is pretty well known, and I couldn't not mention it in a coastal walks chat. But World's End is in Hingham, and it's an interesting, I would say, sort of like a one-of-a-kind land formation because it's made up of 4 drumlins that sort of jut out into the harbor in Hingham. And when you're there, you can see Boston Harbor, you can see the city skyline, and also like a range of landscapes. So in the photo, you sort of see in the foreground, there's like these grasses because there are meadows there, but then you sort of traverse this sandy spit to get to the other drumlin, and there's this grand alley of linden and maple trees because back in the day, there was a plan in progress to put a housing development here. And so Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of landscape architecture, actually built an alley of trees, like a carriage path that would lead to these homes in this development. So the good news is the development never came to fruition, but the carriage paths that Olmsted started on are still there. So walking down them is sort of a very grand experience because the trees are towering over you. But aside from that, yeah, you sort of circle the drumlins, you see the skyline, and you really feel like you're at the end of the world, which is, why it's called that. So yeah, and if you haven't done it, I know this is a well-known one, but if you've never been to World's End, I really recommend you go. It's a trustee's property. They have a cute little gift shop. And when I say little, I mean it because it's very small. You can't fit a lot of people in there, but it's great. And the second one here is the Hellcat Interpretive Trail, part of the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge in Newbury. And I think I saw some folks say they were from Newbury as well. This is a great one for birders, of course. There's lots of different shorebirds to see here, including some endangered ones, which you should keep your distance from. But basically, you go here to see shorebirds, you go here to see the ocean, and this one has a lot of like winding staircases through the dunes, like the one you see in the picture. So yeah, beware, there are a lot of stairs here, but if you're open to climbing them, it's worth it because it's a really lovely and somewhat short jaunt around the wildlife refuge. And the last one I really wanted to mention was Nickerson State Park, which is I guess the third Cape hike of this presentation in Brewster. And I have been vacationing on the Cape every summer for my whole life. And when I started writing this book, I realized I had never been to Nickerson State Park. I had seen all the signs for it, had heard of it, just never went there. So finally I did when I was researching, and I loved the hike that I did around the pond here. So when you get to Nickerson, it's not the Cape Cod you picture, right? Like there's not an ocean there. There's not a sandy beach. You're sort of more inland and you've got kettle ponds. And so it's a nice sort of refuge from the crowds and the beach. And say you just want a day where you do something different, you can do the little stroll here where you circle the pond, see the beautiful jasmine, smell it, I should say. See some like glacial erratic boulders and get a good heart pumping walk in. So that's the last coastal hike that I want to highlight. And I also wanted to say that if you end up buying the book, or if you already have it, or if you're hiking and you don't have the book, you can still hike 50 hikes in Eastern Mass. I love seeing which hikes people decide to do. And like I said, I like seeing how other people decide to capture them because, when I was working on the book, I took all the photos for it. I always had a camera around my neck. I always had my notebook in my hands, and was like, sort of busy while I was hiking. So I think it's interesting to see the different ways that other people capture hikes, what they think is pretty on them, what they decide to take photos of, and, how they caption them, what notes they take, things like that. So yeah, definitely follow the account and tag it when you go on a hike. And Mina mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but I signed some book plates for Aesop's Fable and Holliston. So if you do buy the book from there, you'll get a signed copy, which is pretty neat. And I think we'll be providing a link to that as well. But yeah, I think we're going to open this up to the Q&A portion.
Hello, I'm back again. Thank you. Yes, as I said, I just have to feel like I need to run out to go to one of these places. I'm trying to think which would be my favorite. Do you want to stop your slideshow and we can just chat?
Yes, let's do
Okay.
that.
So first of all, I wanted to say you had mentioned one of the, I think it was World End is a trustee's property, and our library has parking passes for a trustees go pass. So if you want to go to some of these places, you can get free parking with that pass at many libraries, not just Ashland. And I want to ask a couple questions before I get to the audience questions. One is, how long did you go on these hikes before you wrote the book?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I actually wrote the book incrementally. So what I would do is go on a hike on the weekend. So maybe, sorry, is there a little bit of maybe it's just my computer. Never mind. I would go on the hikes on the weekends. I would do between 1 and 5 hikes every weekend because I work during the week. Take all my notes, take all my pictures, and then maybe that Monday or Tuesday, this was crazy of me. I would wake up at 5 a.m. and write the chapters for the hikes I just did that weekend before I went to work. So that is how I did it. And I did that from April through November. So every weekend I was hiking for many months.
Were you a hiker before you started or before you decided to do this book?
I would say I was a casual hiker before I started writing the book. I had always enjoyed hiking. I wasn't, a very intense hiker. I still am not a very intense hiker. But spent a lot of time highlighting interesting things to do in New England and Massachusetts for Boston Magazine. And I think writing this book was a really fun way to discover interesting things in Massachusetts that I had never come across before. So I've said before, I think part of the beauty of the book is like discovering these gems in your own backyard, in your home state, if you live in Massachusetts. It's just like there's so much to see and do here, whether it's a new hike or a new place to grab lunch or a new museum that you hadn't heard of before. There's always like something new to discover when you're going to a new town.
Mhm. And how many pairs of shoes did you have to go through to get through all these hikes?
One, I just had the one, but I still have them. And maybe that's a testament to how gentle some of these walks can be. But yeah, I still have my trusty pair of hiking boots. They have not failed me yet. So
That is great to know because I was just like, you must have gone through like 4 pairs of shoes to like get through all of this. But okay, good to know. I'm going to remind everybody to try to put your questions in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, because I'm having trouble keeping track of all of the questions that are coming through on the chat. So I'm going to start with the Q&A, and then and we'll see if you guys can put your questions in there. So somebody asks, were you hiking alone in Wellfleet?
no, I hiked with a friend in Wellfleet. So I was not just the seal and I together by ourselves. I had a friend with me, supervising. And yeah, as he was as equally as surprised as I was.
Mhm. I have to say, like when you were saying that you were the only ones on that beach or that hike, it just seems so shocking to me because I always think of anything on the Cape as being very crowded, especially in the summer. So that must have been really special.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's nice to go to the National Seashore, but also state parks and just sort of get away from the hustle and bustle for a little bit.
Mhm. Um, how long is the hike at Hell's Cat?
Hmm. I think it was 1.5 miles. Let me just check here.
Okay.
Huh. I think it was a 45-minute walk, so pretty quick. Let's see. Oh, I see. I didn't list it. I can look it up in the book right now.
Sure.
Let's see. I wrote the pages. It's on page 178. Let's see.
I do have to say that that's that probably the best part of your book for me is like it has all those details right in the front. Like somebody asked about parking challenges, where's the park, how's the parking, how, where are the bathrooms, are there bathrooms, things like that. Just a quick like overview of if it's going to work for you.
Yeah, and I'll say the address that's listed at the beginning of every chapter for the hike. It is the exact address you should put in your GPS or, your phone or whatever. Because a lot of times maybe, someone might put Hellcat Interpretive Trail in their GPS and Google Maps or Apple Maps will bring you to just, I don't know, nowhere. So this, even if the address seems kind of wonky, it is the address to put in to know where the parking lot is. But the Hellcat Interpretive Trail is only 1.5 miles. I have the hiking time is 1 hour and the difficulty is pretty easy. So it's kind of a breezy stroll along a boardwalk with a lot of stairs, boasting views of salt marshes and the ocean. So
I
it's
love
a
it.
quick, yeah,
Did you take all the pictures yourself for the
I
book?
did. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Um, what time of year did you do the Wellfleet Trail?
So I think I did that one in either May or June. Um, I definitely would recommend going in the early morning because, being in direct sunlight for many hours in the afternoon is not only tiring but kind of dangerous, so be careful. But yeah, it's cooler if you go in the morning in the summertime, though, you can go in the fall too, and it's really lovely, but I went in the summer and I went in the morning.
Mhm. Allison asks, are any of these locales also appropriate for bicycling?
Hmm. It's possible that some are, but I did not cover biking in the book at all. They actually have a separate book for that. Um, but none are coming to mind. So I'm going to go ahead and say no.
How about we say maybe?
Hey.
Hey, it's a reason to go and check it out, right?
Yes.
Susan asks an additional question to the Hell's Cat. You said Hell's Cat is about a 1.5 miles. What was the distance for the other two? There was
Sure.
World End, and
Yes. World's End. on 143. So I have that one as 3.2 miles to do the whole loop, and it takes 2 hours. It's a really fun walk where you're sort of tracing the perimeter of this like peninsula that juts out into the water. Um, yeah, and there's not a ton of like, climbing or anything like that. So that's a good one. And then Nickerson State Park, when I went there are several trails you can take at Nickerson State Park, but the one that I did, I connected a few of them in order to circle Cliff Pond. So this one, it's 3 miles to circle the entire pond, and it takes 2 hours. And it's also, this one's ranked as moderate, just because there are some hills around the perimeter of the pond. But yeah, it's a lovely one.
It sounds it. Joy asks if last year's talk was recorded. It was. It's on our library's YouTube channel, and it was fabulous. So if you want to check it out, I will send a link to our YouTube channel after this session. Bill and Sue asks, how did you get across to Wellfleet?
Well, this hike, oh, I see. So this hike is connected to the mainland. However, it can extend to a place called Jeffrey's Point. And to get to there, it needs to be at low tide. The hike in the book does not cover Jeffrey's Point, but gives you the option to if you would like to. And to get out to that sandy spit, yeah, you have to sort of look at the tide chart, be careful about that, make sure you walk along the sandbar at low tide and make sure you get back at an appropriate time. But the main portion of the hike is attached to the mainland of Cape Cod, so you don't need to do any boating or anything like that.
Mhm. So Elaine asked, and I know you've answered this, but I just want to ask again. Do you include parking information or directions to the trailhead in the book? And I know you said that you give exact coordinates to get to the parking lot.
Yes, yeah. So the address listed at the top of every chapter will bring you right to the parking lot. And actually, let me pull up the Great Island Trail one, because I actually just wrote about the Great Island Trail for Boston Globe magazine. And I was trying to explain to my editor that, if you type in Great Island Trail into the GPS, it's going to bring you somewhere you don't want to be. So, for example, at the top of this chapter, it says 2 to 6 Griffin Island Road, Wellfleet, Mass. And it's like, yeah, that is a residential address, but it is exactly where the parking lot begins. So yeah, there's parking at every trailhead, and it's described in there. So usually you're good to go.
Okay. I wanted to point out that you said the right word, of course, because you are a freelance journalist. You're not rogue. Sorry about that. Sue asks, is there a best time of year for the Great Island Trail?
Yeah, I think I might say May. Well, it's still May, like shoulder season, right? So maybe May or September when the sun is shining. It's warm out, but not so hot that when you're walking 7 miles in direct sunlight, it's gonna really tucker you out. So yeah, May or September would be my recommendation.
Okay. Sue also had this awesome idea in the chat. Have you ever considered establishing a social site where interested hikers can join together to tackle all 50 hikes?
Wouldn't that be fun? I think that would be great. And I think the Instagram account that I showed could be an extension of that. But yeah, and I know some guidebook authors do lead hikes like that. And there actually was, this is separate, but there was a woman right after the book came out. She made it her goal to do every hike in the book within a year, I think. And so she, yeah, posted a picture of every hike she went on pretty much every weekend, sort of like I did. And I was like, oh, you can fact check some stuff for me. But she did it on her own, I should say. So it wasn't a group like this, like you're suggesting, but I think that's a great idea.
Maybe somebody in this audience will make it happen.
Yeah,
Um,
interested.
Actually, Liz has a question that I also have because I often get lost on trails. Are the trails of these places well marked?
Yes, I would say the majority of them are, and when they are not, I note that. So like if maybe there's a particularly confusing area where you're not sure where to go, thankfully you have this chapter to tell you where you need to turn, or like watch out for this, and if you've reached this, you've gone too far. Here's where I got turned around. So hopefully if you're using the book as a guide, you should be good to go. But yes, the majority of the hikes have pretty clear blazes, I would say.
Oh, good, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten lost on trails. We'll talk about that another time also. Are any of these trails closed at a certain time of year for bird nesting?
Ooh, I'm sure they are. When I visited Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, there was a part that I couldn't go to that I originally wanted to because of the bird nesting. Um, I'm sure that fluctuates at certain times of year, especially early summer when a lot of the shorebirds are nesting. But I didn't note that specifically in the chapters where there are bird habitats.
Evelyn says, I did the Great Island Trail in the fall. It was wonderful. You just have to be mindful of the tide if you go out as far as Jeremy's Point.
Jeremy's Point. I called it Jeffrey's Point earlier, but yes, Jeremy's Point is the optional extension you can take. Yeah.
What is the longest hike in the book?
It actually might be the Great Island Trail at 6.8 miles. I can sort of check myself here. Yeah, Great Island Trail is the longest one and my favorite.
John says there's a bike trail that runs through Nickerson, and I saw somebody in the chat say that people do bike World's End as well. So the cyclists are ready.
Perfect.
Let's see. Cape Cod Trail goes through Nickerson. Is Great Island Trail a well-defined path or just walking the shore as is?
I would say it's a combination between walking the shore and well-defined paths, though when you're walking the shore, it's pretty clear where you need to continue to, right? So like I mentioned at the beginning of the hike, you're sort of tracing this inner inlet in the harbor, and there's almost like nowhere else for you to go but this little sandy opening that's clearly like inviting you to go there. So I would say the Great Island Trail is not confusing to navigate, despite not having traditional blazes.
Okay. Pamela asks, do you give information on whether pets are allowed or not?
Yep. Yeah. So every hike specifies whether dogs are allowed.
Nice. What about, can I bring my cat?
Good question. I mean, why not, right?
Well,
The signs say dogs or no dogs, but bring your cat, see what happens.
say, bring your pet squirrel or your pet ferret, do whatever. As long as you don't bother the birds.
Right.
Nancy says on the Pedex Island Trail, is the trail only in the sun or are there some shade?
There is shade in Pettis Island. And actually, oh, I wish I could show you. There's a really neat, maybe you'll be able to see it. Like a tunnel, a tree tunnel almost, where you walk under some tree cover that has grown in such a way that it looks like a tunnel. And okay, I'm gonna hold it up to the screen. It might not translate, but you can kind of see it, right? So
Yeah.
there are parts, yeah, where you sort of walk under tinted leaves, but the majority of it, I think, is in the sun. However, like there's a visitor center at Pedex Island where you can fill up your water bottle and you can cool down. And yeah, one side of the island has a lot of trees and one doesn't. So.
This is a question about parking. It's so difficult. Would you consider expanding the book to add more trails with more lots tagged? The Cochituate Rail Trail comes to mind. And I was thinking that I wonder if there's more people going to these places after COVID. So parking is even more difficult now because people are, at that time, people really were looking for more nature and things like that. And I don't think that's lessened totally.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I will say I never had trouble parking when I was out there doing these hikes, but you're right. This was pre-pandemic. And they might be a little more popular now. Yeah, I think if I were to do a revised edition, I could add additional information about parking, but most of the hikes in the book, I will say, have like fairly sizable lots to park in. And if they don't, again, I will specify and suggest a few places to park. So
Okay.
yeah.
Marie asks, are there any trails especially good for seniors?
Yes, a bunch of them. And they're marked at the beginning of the book. So the difficulty levels in the book are easy, moderate, and strenuous. And I would say a lot of the hikes marked as easy are good for seniors, but there's one in particular that I think is great for seniors, great for little kids, great um, for anyone. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Who wants to take their time. I think there's a portion of it with signs written in Braille, which is pretty neat. And now I'm not going to be able to find the name of it. It's not jumping out to me. You
That's
can keep
okay.
looking if you want to ask another question if you like.
That's okay. Because somebody else asked, is there a trail that's best for kids, especially like 7 to 9 years old?
I would say any of the easy or moderate hikes would be great for kids 7 through 9. And many of them are, 2.5 miles or less, which takes 2 hours or less. So they're pretty manageable.
Mhm.
But I think Rocky Woods is pretty easy, pretty flat. It's only 2 miles. That could be good for seniors and kids. Um, Borderland State Park is a fun one. In Easton, Massachusetts, I think I saw someone from Easton here. I love going down there. And there's plenty of places to rest too with benches if you decide you want to stop for a snack or something like that. Um,
Actually, Linda just put in the chat that the Nauset Marsh Trail has a section with Braille signage. Awesome.
yes, yes, which is great. That is actually not the one I'm thinking of, but you're right. It does have that. I don't know why it's not jumping out at me. I keep looking at my list of 50, waiting for it to surface.
That's okay. Liz asked similar question. I had what Linda said because Liz asked, are there any handicapped accessible places? Are there any that you thought were particularly good for somebody that might have a handicap?
Yes, and it's the one that I'm still looking. It's so lovely. Let's see. Not Broadmoor Wildlife Sanctuary is another one that would be good for seniors in Natick. That one's great. It's not Hale Reservation. Also fairly easy if you want to circle a pond. Good for seniors and kids. Caratunk Wildlife Refuge on the south coast, sort of near the border of Rhode Island, is an easy, gentle walk. Also not it.
She's like doing this like live. It's pretty fun.
I'm surprised that it has not, I've not found it yet. But are there any other recommendations?
Well, Annie asks, which of these trails would be best for photographers to capture the beautiful fall foliage?
Ooh. Um, One of my favorites is the Noanet Woodlands in Dover. There's a great view from Noanet Peak up there where you can see the skyline of Boston in the distance, but you've got like a really lovely view of all these trees in the fall that I happen to enjoy. Another one is Moose Hill Wildlife Sanctuary in Sharon, I believe. That brings you up on a hillside where you can see Gillette Stadium in the distance and plenty of lovely, lovely trees and foliage in the fall.
So you pretty much did these as day trips. So Michael asks, do you recommend staying at places to experience more of the locations you've written about? Like were there any places that you thought had very nice like hotels or B&Bs or something nearby?
Yes, I'm going to answer that question, but guess what? I just found the hike that I was looking for.
Okay.
kept skipping over it. It's Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary in Norfolk, and it's only 0.6 miles. It takes 30 minutes. It's handicap accessible. Has a really great boardwalk that like passes over a marsh so you can see wildlife, and like an observation platform to sort of chill out at. And yes, also has Braille as well as a sensory trail for anyone who is blind.
Wow. That's in Norfolk, you said.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, you heard it. That's kind of the place that has everything.
Yes, Stony Brook Wildlife Sanctuary. And there are plenty of picnic tables there too if you just sort of want to take a rest afterward. But in terms of accommodations, I did book an Airbnb on the North Shore in Beverly to knock out 5 hikes in one weekend. And that was really fun. It's funny, hard to say how to recommend that, but I know there are some lovely inns in Rockport, including Addison Choate, which would be really fun to stay at if you were to knock out a couple of these hikes. And on the South Coast, I also stayed in an Airbnb in Mattapoisett. Or no, it's the town, Fairhaven. I stayed in Fairhaven. I was very charmed by Fairhaven. Stayed at a little Airbnb down there. But of course, on the Cape, there are a million. I would recommend 2. There's a place called AWOL in Provincetown that I think is really lovely. It has a view of the Province lands, which you can also hike in, though those are not in the book. If you were to do, but this I guess would be for the Wellfleet hike, the Great Island Trail. And if you go down toward Brewster, I lived in Dennis for a couple of summers, and I love Dennis, and I love the Bluebird Motor Lodge down in Dennis, which is not terribly far from Brewster, and it's really fun. A renovated sort of like retro feeling motel, motor lodge style place that's not terribly expensive. So yeah.
I'm getting psycho vibes just from hearing you talk about it.
No, it's not like that. It's really charming.
Okay, I'll take your word. Annie, I think at one point we were talking about, we couldn't remember how many islands Boston Harbor was made up, and it's 34, Annie says.
Yeah, that is a lot, right? And not all of them are accessible by ferry. I think 4 or 5 of them are. And actually, one of the hikes in the book, Lovell's Island, is also accessible or used to be accessible via inter-island ferry, but a new company bought out the bid for providing park service, like ferry service to the national parks islands. My point is that you can no longer travel to Lovell's Island via ferry, which is unfortunate. It's featured in the book, so you have to get a private boat or kayak out there or something. So,
yeah. Jean wrote a note to, I think you were trying to do it to everybody, but it says a shout out to join the trustees of the reservations, great properties to hike. Some were mentioned tonight, and that's totally true. Trustees of reservations have some of the most beautiful sites in the state. Somebody asks, are these trails open year round, weather permitting?
Yep. All of them are open year round. I did a couple of them in chillier temperatures, and everything worked out great. I didn't do any, in deep snow or anything like that. But I even did do in the rain, and they were still quite nice. So
okay, you were quite the trooper to write this book.
I was like, I'm on a sort of schedule here, so I gotta go through with it.
Did you have to get something for your camera? Or do you have a waterproof camera so that you could take pictures even in the rain?
No, I just tucked it in my raincoat and took it out when I needed to. But yeah, I hiked Crow Hill Ledges in Central Mass in the rain, which not an ideal one to do in the rain because it's a little slippery, but recommend that as well.
Bill and Sue asked, do you have any rail trails in your list of hikes?
No rail trails, unfortunately. I know someone mentioned the Cochituate one earlier, but no, just walking trails. I decided not to choose trails that doubled as biking trails. However, there are a couple that people might mountain bike on. So in the Middlesex Fells, you might come across some mountain bikers and a few others. So you can bike at some of these hikes featured in the book. However, I didn't purposely seek out rail trails or like combo places.
And John asks, have you done the Monomoy Wildlife Refuge in Chatham?
Ooh, not featured in the book. I have taken a boat out there to see the seals. I have never walked it though, and I would love to one day, but I'll have to put that on the list maybe for when I revise it.
It does seem like you have an affinity for seals.
Yeah, I guess I do. I really do like seals. I did take a seal tour to Monomoy Island. I think they're like, the dogs of the sea.
See, that's awesome. So you've mentioned, well, one of the things you had mentioned last time, and we just have a few more minutes, is that you had gone to many pizza places when you were doing these trail walks as you discovered these places. But you said for the coastal trails, you had actually discovered some really good seafood places. Were there any one or two that really stuck in your mind?
Yes. So, well, I guess what I'll say first is yes, I sampled a lot of pizza from houses of pizza across Massachusetts while working on this. Um, and I love New England's houses of pizza. I think they're a fun institution. There were fewer houses of pizza visited when I went on these coastal walks because of all the seafood. Um, but of course, there's Roy Moore Lobster Company in Rockport if you go to Halibut Point State Park. Um, Oh, and I also wanted to shout out George's Pizza in Harwich, which is right near Brewster if you do Nickerson State Park. They have a Komopita pizza with sauce. So it's a cheese pizza, but the sauce has meat in it. And it's beautiful to me. Really recommend it. Um, and there's plenty of places up and down the Cape, but Max and Wellfleet is great if you do the Great Island Trail. Um, I didn't have recommendations for down on the South Coast near Mattapoisett. However, you could get South Shore bar pizza if you're over there. If you Plymouth, I just actually went to Town Spa in Stoughton over the weekend. If anyone's familiar with that, it's a famous spot to get South Shore bar pizza, and I got the pizza, and it was excellent.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, I feel like if you're gonna go for those walks, you should have good food, right?
Exactly. Yeah. One time someone asked me what my favorite trail snack was, and my answer is a Ziploc baggie filled with cheese.
Cheese.
Cheez-Its.
Cheez-Its.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll get you through, but I do have a sort of a weird question that more of logistics. So did the publisher give you like an advance or something to pay for all of the food, the entry fees, the driving, all of the ferry fees, things like that?
Yeah, sort of. So, what happens when you work on this kind of project is there is an advance that you get. You get half of it before you start writing the book, and then half of it once you finish the book. So I got half the advance upfront, which, yes, helped to pay for a lot of the parking fees and things like that. Um, yeah, and then I got the rest of it when I finished.
Oh, okay, good. I
Yeah.
was just concerned because I was like, that sounds like you would have had to put out quite an outlay in order to write this book.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I am glad it worked out like it did.
Great. So one last question is, you said you might revise the book, but do you have any other books in mind?
Mm, hard to say. Not at the moment. I know I've toyed with the idea of writing about the phenomenon of houses of pizza, which is unique to New England, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire mainly. I really still think that would be a blast. Haven't I started getting the ball rolling, I think last year, maybe after we talked. Still kicking around in the idea phase, but other than that, no.
No. But we should be able to find your writings in all of those places that you mentioned, Boston Globe, Boston, um, oh my gosh,
Awesome.
magazine,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I should mention I just wrote the August cover story of Boston Magazine. It's about glamping in New England and Atlantic Canada. So all the best places to glamp. And you could hike and glamp, combine them. But
I am a master glamper, so I'm all over that.
it was a fun one.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us here again and giving us this amazing conversation about places that we can go visit. Like I said, it is August and we're getting to the end of the summer, but these places are open year round and they're beautiful for different reasons at different times of the year. So get out there and check out those places and take Madeline's book with you. It's a great guide.
Yes, it's a fun one. And to the person who said happy trails, I actually wrote that on the book plates before I signed my name. So if you buy from Aesop's Fable, you can see that little message.
That's fabulous. All right. Well, thank you, Madeline. And thank you for everybody who's been here and all of your wonderful questions. And I hope happy trails to you all.
Bye bye.
Have a good night, everyone.